Okay, there we go. So welcome. Today, the idea is that we are going to develop a deeper understanding of the why and what behind PBL. I call it PPBL because that includes both problem and project-based learning. Those are going to be our tools that are going to help us with NGSS engineering design in the theme of this conference. And also you're going to participate in a lot of quick modeling strategies to create what we're going to call a grab bag. So the idea with the grab bag is you've got all of these things ready in case there's a moment or an emergency that you need it, and you're going to be constructing your grab bag today. So this will be quick. I encourage you to engage as much as possible, use the chat. The strategy grab bag is going to be coming into the chat now. Oh, Johan says no access. Let's double check that. Thank you.
I changed the access to everybody.
Okay, super. Thanks, Heather. So that's coming your way. There it is. And what the grab bag is, basically it's just a place for you to store your thinking. If you're a person that likes to doodle or likes another way of taking notes, you don't have to use this, but it will help you organize the content. So we're going to go through 7 essential elements of PPBL today. I'm going to share lots of quick modeling on strategies and ideas, and then you can kind of think, how is this connected to the greater theme of the conference? How can this help me in NGSS engineering design? And then there's a bit of a reflection at the bottom that we will end with. Before we start, a lot of the things in my presentation come from PBL Works, which used to be the Buck Institute. They are the producers of some of the best PBL content. And I also got to this point with PBL because I've had tons of mentors, some of their names there, that have worked on growing the PBS culture in my practice and in my school. So I just want to give a shout out to them. So we're going to start with the why. Go ahead and just tell me, what are some of the current challenges in learning that you are facing? You can drop that in the chat, or if anybody wants to unmute, we could probably talk about this all night because there's plenty of challenges. But just throw a few things out there. Some resources, that's a challenge. Connecting STEM challenges and engineering design. What about not with the NGSS or the PBL lens, but just generally being an educator right now? What are some of the current challenges that you're facing in learning? Time, competing demands, time to plan, supporting kids through the process, shortened schedule, totally. Time, yes, time is always a challenge. Is anyone having a hard time right now with motivation in their school? Engaging it versus completing the curriculum? Absolutely. So really deep learning and not just superficial coverage. These are definitely happening at my campus too. Student autonomy and motivation, distractions, yes. I'm with you. So I wanted to just kind of warm us up because we have a lot of things that are challenging, and I don't want to make a statement that PBL will fix them all. However, PBL is actually a research-based best practice when it's implemented with the essential elements and when it's high quality. So if I could just read you, one quote that summarizes this. Students comparing learning outcomes for students taught via project-based learning versus traditional instruction show that when implemented well, PBL increases long-term retention of content. It helps students perform as well or better than traditional learners in high-stakes tests, which surprises many people, improves their problem-solving and collaboration skill, and improves their attitudes towards learning. That has a lot to do with motivation. So I wanted to share that with you just in terms of one of the whys. And by the way, you'll see in my presentation, everything has extended reading because we'll never be able to go super deep into everything, but there are links where you can find information. This, as I mentioned, PBL Works is really, really a powerful organization in terms of production of items that will help you implement PBL. So I would definitely recommend digging into this, and they've done a lot of research that they've pushed out there that shows that it does so many things. So the why for me, like if I know that there's one thing that can help my students be academically ready, help them retain what we're trying to get them to learn, make them feel empowered and take on leadership that'll motivate them, practice 21st century skills, be creative, have grit. If there's something out there that does all of this, then, why aren't we doing more of it? So I feel very passionate about PBL, and those are some of, for me, what I've felt the why is. Not listed here, well, I guess it is in Buck's notes here, in teacher satisfaction. I've never felt better than when I'm teaching my students in PBL, having conversations about their learning journeys. So just a quick touch back for those of you that came in, Heather's going to drop a link in the chat to this PBL NGSS grab bag. And what we just kind of went over in the last few minutes were many of the reasons why we might want to combine PBL into any teaching practice, but especially our NGSS practice. And those were many of the reasons that you can see there. Thanks, Heather, for being my buddy. Okay, now we're going to talk about the what. So we know from these NGSS conferences and from our own practice, NGSS is a three-dimensional phenomena-driven approach to student learning and science. It's not a curriculum, it's a framework, and we've gone through many things in these conferences to help develop curriculum or understand what curricular pieces really are three-dimensional and phenomena-driven. We know that in the context of engineering, we use problems, authentic problems, instead of always a scientific phenomena. And part of NGSS is the ETS. ETS is Engineering, Technology, and Applications of Science, and that's an embedded approach within science to develop your design skills. Your design skills include these things in ETS 1, A, B, and C. So getting really good at defining engineering problems, developing possible solutions, and then evaluating and going through processes to figure out which one's optimal, which one is the best. That's engineering design. That's our process. And as Heather mentioned on the first day, in this conference, we're not going to tell you which process is the best, but we're going to show you and expose you to different processes. So for example, this is the engineering design process for kids. This will probably feel appropriate for the level that many of you teach, since this is our K-5 group. You can find a link to that in the speaker notes if you want to dig deeper into this particular the provider of this image and this 5-step process. You could also use, or you may be familiar with, design thinking, which comes out of the design school from Stanford University. I think what really sets this one apart is the empathy step, where you don't even get to define what your problem is until you go through a great effort to really understand your audience. So that may feel like a good fit for you. And I find that this one tends to work well for PBL projects that maybe aren't also science-based, where you're dealing with a lot of social phenomena or social studies. This one is from Engineering for Good by PBS Learning. And you can see one thing I really like about this is that it really shows it's not a linear process. You do a lot of circling back. You're always moving around. So I won't tell you which design process to use. I will tell you that none of them are perfectly linear. They all have lots of loops and things where students are responding to something authentic when they're solving problems. So it does require like a teacher mindset of sometimes just like letting go and not always trying to stick with the rigid plan, because things are going to come up when you're working with authentic problems and problem solving. So where does PBL fit into all this? PBL is meant to be a dynamic, student-centered approach to learning that's focused on authentic application of content and skills. It is assessment that causes learning. So making an assignment, making a project in PBL is not going to just give you value at the end when you grade it and you know what they learned. It's not assessment of their learning. Each step in your process, in your PBL, is their learning. And that's also true with engineering design process. It's not just the solution that matters. It's also, can they define the problem? Can they generate solutions? Can they think in innovative ways together with their team? And then can they arrive to a solution that truly is optimal? But it's very much about the process and not just the product. And when we do that, we are causing learning by making great assessments. There's a lot of jargon in the PBL world, so I won't go into all of that, but I will say PBL, and what I really mean to say there, you might be doing project-based learning. Today, we're going to spend a lot of time with the essential elements, which is like that left side. A lot of that comes from PBL Works, formerly Buck Institute, and those tend to be probably the highest quality because they're the most authentic, open-ended, but they can also feel the scariest to teachers because you're going to let go of a lot of things. It's going to be like that squiggly line on the bottom. Problem-based learning is a great starting place. You tend to have a bit more control, but it's still authentic in some way. We also find that sometimes PBL is like too open-ended in the upper school for our AP teachers. So if you need something that's going to fit with a really specific set of content, which could happen in K through 5 too, PRBL or problem-based learning could be a good place to start. But really, once you get things in your grab bag that you're going to be building today, you're probably doing a hybrid, or you're going to be transitioning in and out of both approaches. So similar to the idea that you don't have to stick to one engineering design process, you don't have to hardcore adhere to all 7 essential elements in PBL. You can choose what works for you. And when we did some of this professional development in my school, at the Columbus School, we said, you really can't do it all in a day. So maybe start by implementing 2 or 3 essential elements in a unit. So if we're focusing in on really what makes something PBL, I really like this graphic from PBL Works. It's got the 7 things. You have to start with your key knowledge, understanding, and success skills at the center. So that would be where your NGSS standards or performance expectations come in. And then these are all of the things that you do in your unit or in your assessment that create project-based learning experience, something that is rich, complex, student-centered, and causing learning. And probably teacher satisfaction too. It's important to know that this isn't an extra thing. It is the thing that is going to capture all of your efforts. It's the approach that's going to help all the skills and content come together. And it does take practice. So just know messiness is okay. And what I hope that you'll see are that this is the best BFF bracelet. I know it's very cute, but NGSS and PBL are for me, they're best buds. They fit perfectly, those halves of the friendship bracelets. A quick note, doing PBL is not the same as doing projects. So I definitely started out, I had my students making the cell cakes. They learned how to bake stuff. We got to eat way too much Jell-O, cake, anything that they cooked up. That was a project, but it was in reflection, in my own reflection. It wasn't something that was super authentic. It wasn't complex. They all came in with some different type of food, but all of them were cells. And I was the main one that was providing feedback through my rubric of a cell model. So just know that not all projects are PBL. And today we're going to develop an idea of what makes a project actually project-based learning. All right, so now we're going to get into the how. This is the speed tour. We're going to do lots of modeling, so get your fingertips ready to write things in the chat and into your grab bag. So the first thing in PBL is you need to start with a challenging problem or question. This is what makes it authentic. It's what makes it compatible with engineering design process. Oh, didn't know I had disappearing images there. So where does it fit? It fits usually into the beginning of your process when you're defining the problem in any of these models. So you want to make sure that that problem is challenging and complex. Otherwise, if you're making a cell cake, it's not going to be complex enough to sustain inquiry and to really go deep with this. Here are two possible strategies that can help you create a challenging question or problem. The first one is a GRASP prompt. So GRASP, you can see it stands for goal, role, audience, situation, product or performance, and standard. I'll show you what that looks like in just a second. And the second one is how might we questions. How might we questions are meant to encourage risk taking by being extremely open-ended, and they don't suppose anything in the way that the question is written. So they're meant to create and set the stage for students to be generative, to have lots and lots of possible ways of solving the problem. Because sometimes when we start an inquiry unit with a very specific question, there's only one answer that's going to be possible. So a how might we question allows for many, many truths, many, many solutions, and many possibilities. And that sets the stage for your creativity and your risk taking. So here on the left, you can see one of our second grade standards. This is what we would call a crossover standard, where it's already attached to your content. And then on the bottom, you have an ETS standard, which is the one that's separate, where it's part of the engineering design. So you can take a moment to look at both of those standards if they're not from your grade level. So in this one, we have, in second grade, we have students analyzing data obtained from testing different materials to determine which ones have properties that are best suited for an intended purpose. So if I were going to write a GRASP prompt, at first, it might help if you start writing them in order with the GRASPS. I like to kind of let it flow, but I've identified where those are. So the problem that I've created for this using a GRASP prompt is you've just been hired as a tester for a company that tries out a variety of products before they are sold. Your first tasks are to figure out what materials will work best for 3 different products: hammers, food service trays, and rain jackets, and convince the company management using a slides presentation which materials will create the best sales based on evidence and data you collect. So there you can see your G is your goal. So you're trying to figure out what materials will work best for 3 different products. You can also see your role. You are a tester for a company. You can see your audience. It's the company's management. You can see your situation. You've just been hired by these people and you need to basically give them a product, that's your P, a slides presentation that tells them which materials work best in different circumstances. And your standard, the last S is over here, that's the NGSS standard. So that's just a quick example of how GRASPs, that prompt, can help you start off a unit with a problem. And then a how might we question down on the bottom. I mentioned that how might we is basically setting the stage for lots of possible answers. You can see, you can really connect engineering, the ETS engineering design standards, to any content. So if we were trying to look at, in 5th grade, ESS 2.2, where they've already looked at percentages of water, different types of water found in reservoirs around the world, the distribution of that. We might take that deeper by pulling in an engineering design standard and using a how might we question. How might we save more fresh water by understanding the impact of our daily activities? So you're going to get students that talk about meat consumption, students that talk about showers, students that talk about when you water the lawns, who knows, wash your hands, don't flush the toilet. If it's yellow, let it mellow. There's a million possible answers. But that how might we question really is going to let the complexity and the many ways that a problem can be solved come out. Okay, so I'm going to give you a moment to process that. We're going to spend more time on this essential element than many of the others, because I feel like it's the start of the unit and it's so important. So I'm going to give you about 3 minutes to pick a standard. I've given you a couple here, and I'd love for you to try to either write a how might we question or write a GRASP prompt. And you can see 2 models for how to do that on this slide. Once you finish, if you feel confident, I would love for you to drop that in the chat.
Ajá,
A little
apoyarla.
bit of think time and production time. I think a few people just came in. So I'm going to send our grab bag document that we're working with one more time in the chat. Open that up, make a copy of it. And we are currently on essential element 1, challenging problem or question. And we're practicing one of 2 strategies, a how might we question or a grasps prompt. Okay. How might we's are quicker, easier to write than grasps. Does anybody have anything shaping up, even if it's not finished yet, that they'd like to share? Watching your thinking faces.
The one that comes to my mind is how might we help? I could see doing that with my elementary kids. How might we help our principal communicate better at the Monday assembly when all of the students are better? How might we help the student body hear better?
I love that. Definitely something that we have going on in Columbia too. Very challenging environment in assemblies that helps a real need. It empowers the student, and that is related to a design process. We're not always building towers and doing mechanical engineering. Sometimes we're engineering the right design for a social situation. So that's a great example. Anyone else want to share? How might we or a grasp? Okay. So those are the 2 strategies that are there for you. My recommendation is, especially if you're just starting out and you're not ready to do a fully open-ended PBL, grasps is a great way to create a scenario that lets the problem solving start. And then how might we questions are much more open-ended. So those might give you a more like true PBL feel to start your unit off. And they can be written to complement any standard or any problem, like Azalea's authentic situation with the assembly. Okay, so we're going to jump into number 2. This is essential element 2, sustained inquiry. Is there anything more perfect to complement NGSS than this essential element? So this basically means we're not just curious in one moment of the unit or asking questions on one day or at the beginning or at the end. We sustain it the whole time. So this, just like we want to always have students being curious and generating questions as we bring up new phenomena throughout the unit, we also want students to continue asking questions and sustaining their inquiry around the problem that they're solving all the time. So this happens in every part of your engineering design. A couple ideas, just push yourself to start, pause, and end with questions. Many people, I would say elementary teachers, tend to be much better at this, driving question boards and wonder walls. It can be a whiteboard, a bulletin board, a sticky note board. Quest discussion is basically a game or a strategy that celebrates question asking. And then question sorts is maybe something that you've seen Paul model, where you generate a bunch of questions and then you sort them into types of questions. So I'll try to do a bit of quick modeling with those. These are some examples of what Wonderwalls or driving question boards might be. They might be sticky notes. They could be anchor charts with things on them. Like I said, whiteboards. There's so many possible ways to celebrate inquiry by displaying it on your walls, your windows, and in your classroom. So we're going to try Quest discussion, and I'm going to ask a few people for permission to unmute them and ask them to play. Robin, would you be willing to be our buddy for this game?
Sure.
Okay. Michael, would you be willing to be our buddy for this game? It's okay to say no.
Sure.
Okay, thanks. And Heather, would you be willing to be our buddy for this game?
Sure.
Okay. So Quest discussion, there's really only one rule. You can only ask questions. You can only answer with a question. So I'm going to say a person's name. I'm going to ask a question. You have some question starters there. And since we're learning about PBL, the only rule is you've got to include PBL in your question. Now, if you were doing energy transfer or relationships in energy or ecosystem dynamics, you could put something in there besides PBL. So I'm going to say Heather's name, indicating that she's going to ask a question next. And the only thing we're going to do is create a chain of questions. So Heather, when do you think challenging problems come into a PBL unit?
Michael, why do you think authentic real world problems engage students at the beginning of PBLs?
Britta, how can we answer this question?
Robin, have you done PBL in your classes before?
Why are you asking me about PBL? No. Heather, how do teachers promote sustaining inquiry?
Britta, have you ever done a PBL around a failing ecosystem?
Michael, what are the 7 essential elements of PBL?
Robin, when is the best time to really implement PBL?
My question is also, at what grade level did you start PBL, Britta, when you implemented?
Okay, so you get an idea of how Quest discussion works. It's hard not to answer, but it's a practice in sustaining inquiry. Thank you, Robin. Thank you, Michael. And thank you, Heather, for being our buddies for the Quest discussion. Like I said, 2 rules. Only questions, and then insert the word of your choice that's dealing with your engineering problem or your science phenomenon, whatever it is. Quest discussion works for many things. Some of our teachers have used it in morning meetings before too. Okay, question sort. Sorry for the quality of this image. I'm just realizing it as it's big on my screen. You may have seen Paul model this. So you have students throw a bunch of questions out there and then you start to sort them. This picture, these are sorted by the NGSS CCCs, patterns, cause and effect. However, you can make your own categories. So I'm going to ask for a couple people to just throw questions again about PBL into the chat, but try to not make them a question for a person, but general questions about PBL. So throw a few questions in the chat and we will look at how to sort them. Give you a moment to think about those questions. Shout out to Sarah in here from our 3rd grade. We actually put question sorting in as part of the first lesson in our Survival Through the Ages unit. She knows this one. This is in her grab bag. Okay, I've got one from Johan. How much time do you need for a PBL session? So is that a procedural question? Is that a cause and effect question or a structure and function question? That is a question about how to do PBL. So I'm going to move Johan's question there. What are basic things and resources to have ready before implementing PBL? From Anna. Thank you, Anna. So I'm going to copy and paste her question into, what do we think, participants? Is that a cause and effect question, a structure and function question, or a procedural question? Are we getting at how to do it, what happens if we do it, or different things that happen in PBL?
That's a procedural, right?
Yeah, that's a procedural question. So that's just a super, I'm not going to sort all of your question, but that is a good practice for thinking about the purpose of questions. And if you go to the Wonder of Science, Paul's website, he has videos where he's modeling this. So this was just a super, super quick look at this practice, but it is powerful and it helps us understand that questions can both encompass our content, our cross-cutting concepts, steps of engineering design, so many things. Okay, we're moving into essential element 3, authenticity. All the things about the mission statements, like this is really where we need to be at if we are going to accomplish those missions and visions on the walls of all of our schools. So authenticity is similar to the challenging problem in question. You have to make sure that you're providing it in the beginning of the unit. Otherwise, everything that comes after it will not tend to be real world problem solving, will not tend to be highly complex. So you've got to front load the authenticity into your planning and start the unit out that way. I like this graphic. So in order to have authentic tasks, you've got to have a couple things going on. You need your NGSS standards behind them. You need opportunities to practice some of what we would say the SEPs, the critical thinking, where they're developing explanations and solutions. It needs to be purposeful and engaging. PBL will absolutely help with that. And real world and relevance is that challenging problem or question that you set up that is authentic. So at a minimum, I mentioned that problem-based learning is sometimes like easier to start with. With problem-based learning, you can use a grasps prompt to create a realistic scenario or a fabricated problem. It may not actually impact the student, but they can imagine that it's real. Imagine you're an astronaut. Imagine you are the principal of a school for a day. Imagine you are, put them in a different role where they need to solve a problem. And it's still something that really, exists, but it's not necessarily real. That would be the minimum to call a task authentic. Ideally, you want problems that are actual problems that impact the student and people that they care about in the community or in the world in some way. And that's where you can possibly pull from things like the Sustainable Development Goals. You can pull from, like, again, Azalea's idea, we have this problem with communication in the assembly or something like that. You pull in something that is real world, you connect it to the standards and skills, and then that gets the whole ball rolling. So just remember there's a whole range of ways to make something authentic, but the minimum is a realistic scenario, even if it's not something that they're directly engaging in or have experienced. And the ideal, which might be closely connected to the how might we questions, is an actual problem that's affecting the students, their local or global community, and people and things that they care about. So here are 3 possibilities. Looking at that same second grade standard, what would be the most authentic? So in the chat, you're going to rank these from most to least authentic. So number 1, a multiple choice tests that ask which material is the hardest, because that could be one of the outcomes of working on the standard. Number 2, students are asked to choose to test and decide which classroom furniture the school should purchase before buying it. Or number 3, you can see that same grasps prompt. So which one would be the most authentic? Then partway there, maybe a scenario, and then the least authentic. What order would you put those numbers in? While you're thinking, Robin, you said in terms of NGSS, our projects always focusing on design. They're not always focusing on the whole design process, but sometimes they're focusing on part of understanding like a larger design problem. So it could just be like the ETS1, for example, is just understanding the problem. That doesn't necessarily feel like it's all the way into design, but it's where it starts. Okay, I see tons of 2, 3, 1s. I totally agree with you. It is affecting the students where their bottoms have to sit all day on the school furniture, and it's connected to what they're learning in second grade science. So let them, be connected to that if that's a possibility. If you don't have a furniture purchase coming up, make the grasp prompt. Then they were working with a realistic scenario, even though it's not high authenticity. The least would be a multiple choice test. There's really nothing authentic about that. It's just the recall of knowledge. So those are a few tips for you in terms of thinking about how to bring in authenticity. Student voice and choice. This is essential element number 4. Excuse me. This happens in lots of different places, but especially, too many clicks. It especially happens when students are thinking about how they want to show their learning or what they want to research. So to give you a bit of an idea, voice is really about letting some personal expression and experiences of the students come through. So that might be like, okay, we're going to learn about materials. What materials do you have in your real life? What are your preferences? And then choice might be, how do you want to show it? How do you want to show me that you know? So choice involves providing options in maybe how that learning is shown or what the assessment looks like. And voice provides an element of their personal expression or their interest or their preferences coming through in what they're learning. So we had this older menu that kind of collapsed both of them at Columbus School. I would say this one is actually more choice than voice. You have lots of ways to show your learning so the student could check a box and decide what they want to do. I know that not all of these would be appropriate in lower elementary or all K through 5, but this is just an example of how you could create maybe a menu of 3 things that they could choose how they want to show their learning. So we'll contextualize this. Let's say you're a second grade teacher and you're thinking about voice. How can I connect to my students' experiences, passions, and preferences? And you have a star soccer player in your class and you have another student that is obsessed with makeup. And you're still on this standard about choosing materials that have properties that are best suited for an intended purpose. Can anybody make a connection to maybe what you might ask the star soccer player or the person obsessed with makeup to consider looking into? So think to yourself, okay, soccer players, materials, they've got jerseys, they've got shoes, they've got different soccer balls. There's probably more things that I don't know about, not super athletic. So you could potentially, have them test materials for a jersey or materials for the insole of a soccer shoe, or think about why soccer balls aren't made of wood or metal or things like that. And if you're thinking about, your person that's obsessed with makeup, there's so many materials in terms of the application of makeup. So why are they usually, these soft, spongy brushes and squishy things? Why aren't they a variety of other materials? So you can think about the experience, passions, preferences of your students and let them connect that to this standard. That is not forced at all. That's just them making a natural connection, and that's part of voice. Choice, I mentioned that's options for showing what you know. So everybody's got the student that can repeat everything that happened in class, but they'll never write it down, right? I know. Yes. So what's their option? How can they show you that they know if they're not going to write? Feel free to unmute, use the chat. I have been talking to myself a lot lately, but I would love, I'd love people to shout things out.
Maybe a video showing their learning, or like my students love to do like TV shows, or imagine that they are presenters, and most of my, they don't like to write students, they love this kind of activity, or having that option
Totally.
at least.
Yeah, have them talk it out. That's not to say that they can get all the way through their school career never having written anything, but if you know that you're really looking at, can they analyze data? If you're trying to get evidence of their learning on an NGSS standard, it's not telling you that they have to write it. A lot of teachers opt in automatically to written assessments, and that creates a confounding variable because you're also testing their writing when you do that. So giving them options of how they're going to show you, if they want to do the TV show, or if they want to just come and tell you in a small group or at a table, great. If you have the blooming artist, maybe they want to create an artistic representation of data. So it's just voice and choice is really where your curricular design has flexibility so that students can show you in different ways and they might be able to connect it to their own interests. So those are a few ideas for this essential element. Reflection is essential element number 5. Many teachers make the mistake of only having reflection at the end. And I'm not going to model this one perfectly because I'm going to have you reflect just at the end. But reflection should actually happen all throughout your PBL. I just went into Spanish and I was going to say retroalimentación. Reflection should be frequent, structured, meaningful, and varied. And it shouldn't just be academic. It can be academic, personal growth, metacognition. It can be many things. So it should be often. It should have a structure. It's not very helpful to just say like, go reflect on that, or like reflect on your learning. That could be interesting maybe once in a unit, but you want to provide more structure around how to reflect. You want it to be meaningful. Sometimes meaning comes from sharing. So it can also be what you do with the reflection. Maybe don't always, make your reflections written. Sometimes you get to reflect with a partner. It should be lots of different things. Keep the reflection novel, which is varied. So applying this, here's 3 possible types of reflection. There's a million types, but you could ask students to reflect on what happened. So think back and provide descriptions of the things that happened, reflecting. Then think about, so what? So why does what happened matter? And then now what? What will happen next? What will we do as a result of it? And as I said, varied. That could be your exit ticket. It could be a video post. It could be a verbal check-in with a peer. It could be partner chat. So if we were to apply this to our same now very famous 2nd grade standard, your what happened is what happened with those different materials today. Jot a few things down that you remember. What materials or products from today did you use in your real life? Why does this so what? And then what might you do differently the next time you're practicing testing something? That's thinking about the procedures, the design process, and what they'll do next. So that's a what happened, so what, now what, thinking, along the lines of that standard. Reflection, when done properly, should help them become a better student the next time that they walk into class, because it's creating more connections academically. And if you're using the so what and the now what, they're probably also thinking about their learning and their process. I don't have a school of modeling on that one, but I am going to ask you to reflect at the end. Essential element number 6 is critique and revision. When I talked about teacher satisfaction in the beginning, one of the things that gave me the greatest teacher satisfaction doing PBL was how I worked with this step. And the reason why is because I was a middle school teacher with 113 students, and grading all of their work was making me go bonkers. So having them critique and revise each other's work and asking other adults and students to participate in the process and give meaningful feedback saved me. And even if you are an elementary school teacher and you have 25 students, you also have probably multiple core areas. So multiply that by the 4 or 5 subjects that you teach. I know that you're doing a lot of grading. Have someone help you. And do this with formatives and summatives throughout the whole process, because there's a lot of things to give feedback on, critique and revise in a process-oriented engineering design PBL. It's going to happen everywhere. So a couple things here, a couple ideas and strategies. Basically, many checkpoints, many people. So who? You can have peer feedback, peer critique, teachers, other classes, experts, Skype a scientist. You can get feedback and critique and revision from a lot of people. How can you do it? You can see one possible way of doing that up in the right corner. So that's a plus in Delta format. So one way to give feedback. You also are, I'm sure, all very familiar with just your classic rubrics, handing those rubrics or parts of rubrics, sometimes just one section, to students and having them do a gallery walk or partner up with someone and giving them feedback. Critical Friends in the K through 5 level is something that you would have to practice with students. I've left that for you here, but this is a fairly well-researched protocol. You'd have to go over it with your students, and we won't have time to really get into the nuts and bolts of how to do it today, but you have students in different roles. You have your timekeeper. One student one student gives a presentation about their idea or their step or whatever they're doing. The people that are listening are going to ask for clarification. They're going to use criteria that could be your rubric, a checklist you give them, hot and cold feedback, whatever you want to tuck in there for them giving feedback. They're going to share I likes, I wonders. The presenter will come back after listening to the audience. They're going to share a reflection, and then there's resource sharing at the end. This is just one way of doing it. You can take what you like and leave the rest. If you have participated in our showcase sessions, we use a modified version of Critical Friends, where our teachers that bring their assessments, they take a moment to share their ideas. The audience asks clarifying questions, looks at criteria, and then the person that presents the assessment or the unit basically says thank you and shares what they had. And I know, for example, because I was in there, I know Sarah has gone through that process. Johan, that was a version of the Critical Friends process. And not to put you on the spot, but if you feel comfortable sharing, like what did the use of that critique and revision process do for you as a person seeking feedback? Sarah, would you mind sharing?
Yeah, I can share. It was helpful because it gave like a range, I would say like a range of like feedback. So it wasn't just like, this is something to fix, this is something to do better. It was more authentic than that. And it gave me multiple ideas, and yeah, it was very helpful. I didn't know you used the Critical Friends protocol for that.
Yeah, we don't always use it by name, but we got inspired by it. And like I'm telling you, we took the pieces that worked for our context of getting feedback on NGSS assessments and then left the rest. So this is modifiable. And in the case of Sarah, if Sarah were a student showing her work to other students, she would be getting targeted feedback because Johan tells her, oh, based on this criteria, yep, you have a phenomena in your assessment. Great job. I remember that happened with the Ice Age assessment. So she's getting meaningful, targeted feedback. And then guess what? When Sarah goes to turn that assessment into the teacher, she has one of the criteria that you need, and a student has held her accountable to it. So it is, using an example of peer feedback, it is just so much easier for your grading. Ooh, I just realized my time. Apologies, peeps. I'm going to wrap us up quickly. Okay, the last one is the public product. It's called public product, but it's really about the process too. So you want to create more authenticity, more motivation and excitement and accountability by providing a place where student work is seen by others. This mainly happens at the end. However, you can do a lot of things that are not just culminating. So cool science fair, design fair, culminating thing at the end, but also have them share their steps, have them share their pieces with others. So they need an audience, and that audience can be people they know, people in the school, or it can be strangers, because a lot of work nowadays is done on the internet, through websites, through social media, through blogs. That's still a public product if it can be seen in a place. So it's not always, the top, like a presentation. It could be an exposition in your school around climate change posters that are placed somewhere in the school. So basically, for public product, needs to have an audience, needs to be visible. Doesn't have to be in person, can be online. So here's just one quick example. You have your second graders do a tester's exposition after working with the standard, where they invite other students to come and try out some of the material testing. Just an idea for public product. Okay. We have reached the end of our journey. So I hope that as a result of this session, you have a little bit more of an understanding of the what and why in terms of how project and problem-based learning really, really help with engineering design and NGSS, all the places that you can tuck it in. And I hope that you have a grab bag. I know this was fast, so something that I would remind you of, or if you came in late, there are loads and loads and loads of links in our speaker notes. So if you just look mostly in the beginning and under some of these, if you look in the speaker notes, you're going to find additional readings and resources for a lot of the things that I'm recommending. And with that, your reflection will be homework. Sorry, I'm not modeling that one as well as I should be. It's there. And I hope that you have a wonderful rest of the evening at the conference. Thanks, everybody. I hope that that was practical, and I hope it makes you feel inspired to tuck a few PBL moves into your engineering design.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye. Good to see you.
Thanks.
Good to see you, Robin. What a fun surprise.
Bye.